The worst thing I see is people starting on their desktop and then reducing that full desktop experience to mobile and not starting mobile first. The real design challenge, I always describe it as taking a country farmhouse and trying to squeeze it into a New York loft apartment is never going to work. It is much better to start designing for the device and the context and use and the particular customer journeys that are important on that device for that user and for your brand, and work from there.
Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have Sienne Veit, who's all the way over from the UK. She has a very impressive career. She was Chief Product Officer over Kingfisher. She's worked at brands like John Lewis, Marks & Spencer, and now Sienne is the founder of Invisible Stuff, doing some consulting. So welcome, Sienne.
Really great to be here, Kaylin.
Awesome. I always like to start off by learning a bit more about your career. Maybe talk us through your career journey and how you ended up in some of your operational roles and how that led to you to where you are today.
I think retail is one of the best things ever. And it took me a while to get into retail via education and gaming. And then I've always been in software development and specifically in the product side. But what really struck me when I joined M&S, which was my first retail engagement in product development, was just how quickly you can get feedback from customers. And especially when you're working for a large established brand, it's incredibly immediate, and it's always so impressive to be able to work with multiple different teams to bring something to life. So whether you're working with commercial teams or retail teams. And that's really been the arc of my career all the way through John Lewis and to Kingfisher, is helping teams bring their products and services to life digitally to really delight customers. And the golden thread throughout that has been product development with a real focus on mobile. I started out early days in mobile. None of us knew what we were doing. The UI was horrible. It was walled garden. And today, almost everyone is shopping primarily from their phones. And that real-time connection enables brands to develop a very personal relationship with customers. And it's something that I think that we can all do better and all design for.
I love that. And yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of names on your resume that I personally recognize, and the folks in the UK who've walked around, seen a lot. Marks & Spencer, you got Morrison's, got John Lewis. Kingfisher might be a name that folks don't recognize, but the brands underneath them, I'm sure they would. So you've led digital transformation at some of the largest UK retailers, like the ones I just went through. What kind of inspired you to launch your own thing in Invisible Stuff? Why'd you go that path, out of curiosity?
I think that there are two reasons. One, the opportunity to work with smaller businesses and businesses that are starting to scale, and especially businesses wanting to sell into retail and really trying to understand the opportunity to start to improve different parts of the retail technology ecosystem. And the second thing is my desire to work with more sustainable brands that have a really great environmental impact. So that's working with Sustainability Yard, where I'm an advisor, but also fantastic B Corp companies like Poppy's Funerals that are really trying to change up parts of our day-to-day existence in a different way.
I love that. And you mentioned earlier on in your intro that you've seen kind of mobile from its inception. Mobile's at the heart of a lot of customer journeys today, with a lot of folks having their own mobile apps or optimizing their online websites for mobile. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've observed brands making in the kind of mobile-first world over the last 5-10 years?
I think the worst thing I see is people starting on their desktop and then reducing that full desktop experience to mobile and not starting mobile first. So I think the real design challenge, I always describe it as taking a country farmhouse and trying to squeeze it into a New York loft apartment is never going to work. It is much better to start designing for the device and the context and use and the particular customer journeys that are important on that device for that user and for your brand, and work from there. So things that we see that are really annoying to customers on mobile are things like having to sort of skip over or hop over things that interfere with your scrolling or interfere with input. So pop-ups, they might be really helpful from the brand perspective. A lot of chatbots actually hide some of your scroll or your entry buttons, or things like not taking into account that the user might be distracted on a train, on the go, and making experiences too lengthy, or not thinking about how the user is really going to be engaging and not using the full capability of the device. I think all of those things contribute to experiences that are just less than optimal. And this is on the most personal of devices. People are using their mobiles because that's their choice. That's what they want to do. They're on the sofa, they're on the go, and they just want to achieve something, whether it's ordering food or making a booking or buying something that they really want. And I think that's where we need to start when we're designing for mobile.
Makes a lot of sense. And I'm very curious to hear above and beyond that. Do you think the obsession of conversion rate remains the reason why we make some of these potentially half-hearted decisions? So maybe the next conversation that we could talk about is, obviously conversion rate is the dominant metric in e-com businesses, but maybe it has its limitations. Curious to hear your thoughts on that and how some things could actually drive conversion but hurt the business at the same time. So yeah, curious to dive into that from your perspective.
It's a really good observation. And conversion is not a bad metric, but by itself, it is definitely not a useful metric. Because it's an aggregate, it can hide lots of stuff underneath that metric. Because it's a lag metric, it's difficult to act on. So it's an aggregate and it's a lag metric. It doesn't help teams to act on any issues within the customer journey because it masks them. And it doesn't predict any potential future behaviors or future impacts once again, because it covers data points from the entire end-to-end customer journey. If you're a team trying to improve conversion, actually you have to go into the source. So if conversion is down, you have to ask yourself a whole range of questions like, was traffic up phenomenally? Did we have a massive campaign going? Was it low quality traffic where we're just buying lots of new people and actually, because there were low traffic, there was incredibly low intent? Was the campaign particularly broken and sending people to the wrong place? Were we out of stock because something was incredibly popular? Or was there a point of failure somewhere? Was our website too slow? Had someone put a massive multi-megabyte image on the homepage thinking, wow, that looks great, where actually the user's experience of speed and performance went down, and so it was very difficult to progress? All of these things are possible. And because it's an aggregate, high traffic, low conversion doesn't give you an indicator of where in the journey you need to act and you need to optimize. Better indicators or better metrics are metrics that different teams can act on. So your trading team absolutely can have a look at campaigns and what makes sense and should definitely be working on where are people going to land? Does that make sense? What creative are we using? Is the messaging appropriate? Your commercial team should totally be looking at stock and price and fulfillment and seeing what's feasible. At various places I've worked, we've used a metric called visit availability, which is when a customer lands on a product page, is there stock and can they get it the way they want it? Either click and collect, next day, same day. So is there a clear route to fulfillment for that customer on that page for where they're shopping? And then there are all sorts of things that your performance and your product team should be looking at. So things like any issues with payment failure, any lags, any failures further down the system where you're getting loads of error messages, or potentially you might have released something in the security domain and it's blocking lots of users from progressing into checkout, which drives them nuts. You can kind of see it on the user behavior. People trying again and again to get into your checkout and failing. And they get frustrated. And today it is so expensive to acquire and retain customers that it's not worth making them unhappy. You kind of want to be looking at all of these indicators all the way along the journey, every day, all of the time. You shouldn't have to get to conversion to realize you have a problem. So I think there's lots of education needed, and lots of teams will need to think about the metrics that matter to them to really understand the customer's intent and what's really happening, and to optimize. I think a lot of businesses also leave money on the table where they think their conversion's okay, once again, because it's an aggregate measure, but actually there's lots of money that they could be gaining in terms of optimizing your product pages, optimizing search, or optimizing the flow in checkout, because a lot of people tend to fall out because the form filling just isn't great, and it's particularly not great on mobile.
I love this insight. I think it's the first time I've heard it defined that clearly, where you're really discussing leading indicators to checkout and breaking them down by different teams. So that's actually really interesting. I actually wrote down a note. I never heard of the visit availability KPI before, but that sounds like it makes a lot of sense, especially if you're in a marketplace business or you're in a business that has complex fulfillment, like, hey, I'm going to pick this store, but the store doesn't have it, so it's not available. It's really interesting. I'm going to go down the path of saying a few different words, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. So we had offline shopping, we had browser shopping, it went to mobile. I'm talking about platform shifts here. Do you think AI is a platform shift? Do you think AI, like, it comes after mobile? Is AI part of mobile? Curious what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. AI is going to be about shopping. I think the moment you give people the opportunity to be inspired and to find things and to offer them curated collections from wherever in the world and a vast array of different sources, people will go find and will buy things. And I say this as someone who was once told back in the day when I was building mobile right at the start in 2007 that women would never buy shoes on their phone. I think people will go shopping wherever they're given the opportunity to go shopping. Um, is it a separate channel? I think at the moment we need to think about it in terms of what is different about how people might engage with AI, and how do we surface recommendations and sort things and make it easy. It is a different method. It's less transactional and more conversational, and it is off page. So how does your brand perform? How do your values come through when it is potentially an operator or an agent presenting a selection to a customer and not your brand? So I think these things definitely are going to be things we need to experiment with. Do we want to talk about AI commerce? Probably not. I just think this is all commerce, that people will shop wherever they're given the opportunity to shop. And we should just be completely blind to channels in terms of customers will do what they want. We need to optimize for channels, but not necessarily distinguish for those channels.
So let's dive deep into that. Getting more tactical. Do you think the actual chat GPTs of the world are going to become search engines and that's how it's going to interact with commerce? Do we think that AI is going to be leveraged by platforms to do dynamic content loading based on your kind of almost like a mini LLM for each person that comes on the website based on their logged in profile? I'm just naming kind of random ideas, but I'm curious if you've given it a bit more tactical thought in terms of where you think it'll actually play in.
So yes, I do think that everything you mentioned will become a channel. And I think what is happening there is a couple of things. Firstly, you can take a photograph and say, find me this. You can say, look, this is my size. Find me the best fit in jeans from wherever. And we know that underneath, this search is going to be looking at product reviews. It's going to be looking at availability. It's going to be looking at all of those things that I have to specifically surface on one site or one product page, but is doing that en masse. And it might also take into account loads of unstructured content, things like top trending, things like what's available, what's kind of current on TikTok, my favorite stylist recommendations. So I do think that thinking about being able to query loads of both structured and unstructured information in retail is going to surface a different kind of curation. I also think that the conversational side, to be able to refine and filter, we know that customers really struggle when you get to the millions of products problem, that navigating through websites and especially marketplaces can be really onerous for a customer, especially if they know what they want. If they don't know what they want, actually inspiration is even harder to surface these days. And I think that's where your AI agents are really going to come to the fore. And I think we should be experimenting and designing for these to think about what these new patterns of use might look like.
I love it. Let's dive a bit deeper there. Do you think it's big enough where it could also have an impact on back of house? For example, revenue planning, forecasting, inventory, all of that as well? Or do you think most of the value's on like the front end when it comes to commerce?
I think a lot of people are focusing on the obvious sort of uses within the front end. And certainly search and recommendations have been some of the first places because of the ability to look at all sorts of different types of data, not just structured data. But the back end is also really important if you think about the ability for an agent to review past performance, current data points, and make multiple scenarios. So think about you making a marketing plan or a campaign plan. You can take the campaign performance of your last 5 fashion campaigns. You can look at the marketing budgets. You can have a look at the performance across different partners. And then you can create a couple of different scenarios based on what's happening competitively in your market, items at the different price points, particular channels you want to drive, or particular campaign outcomes. And that is going to be so much easier. Beforehand, you'd have to have a data science or a data analyst in your team to do that, and at least a finance analyst. But now a marketing executive can do that pretty easily if they have an LLM that has all of that data in. And I think that's where a lot of businesses are looking. The other area, which is already currently pretty active, is in end-to-end supply chain management. So getting a really good visibility of your stock across all of your points, including right from the warehouse and the manufacturer all the way through to wherever you're retailing. And I think optimizing your supply chain really delivers value because that's in-year, bottom line profit for you.
And if we look at product teams across the commerce vertical, a lot of the value that they bring to the organizations is in consuming data, whether it's through a session replay, voice of customers, looking at analytics of, conversion, login rates, some of the things that you mentioned, and then coming up with theories and basically running tests to drive KPIs up. What does the modern product manager look like after kind of fully scaled AI? Is it part of that journey, in your opinion, that's being automated? If so, which one of it is being automated first? Curious, obviously, you have a lot of kind of product commerce experience as well as more broad experience, but in the product manager context, curious, is it part of the roles that are going to be automated? Is it potentially even the entire role? Curious what your thoughts are there.
So I think there will be lots of automation. So if you think about what we're currently able to do in terms of multivariate and A/B testing, experimentation, we're limited by our ability to manage data, to run thousands of tests at any degree of significance, and to have creative that can fulfill deep personalization of all the variations. That, I think, is possible. And so there will definitely be automation to optimize. And I think that probably brings testing and experimentation forward. The ability to prototype as well probably gets released from design teams. That can be both good and bad, in that almost everyone now has access to code and access to some kind of no-code prototyping. And so you can very quickly validate and conceptualize ideas within roles. So I think there will probably be conflation of roles. However, you can see that in a number of ways. You can either say, look, teams are going to get smaller and more efficient. That would be awesome. Or you could say, well, actually, most teams are going to have generalist capability, but you'll have specialists who can go deep where needed on the stuff that is truly innovative or truly kind of brand important. You don't want to automate those things. You want to use human creativity and innovation in the areas where that's really important. So I think you're going to have lead engineers, lead designers who kind of protected from all of the hundreds of requests that they would normally get, who can focus on doing edge cases and innovation, whilst your core of your day-to-day optimization and innovation is probably done by a more generalist team. So someone who has some coding, some design, and some commercial product management capability, and the ability to release that through automation as well.
Love it. Cool. Well, as we look to wrap up, Sienne, if there's any product leaders that are, I'm sure there's a ton listening, what are your kind of biggest piece of advice for them in 2025?
I think to go on the journey, I think there's lots of hype out there, and I think it's to find ways to integrate all of this incredible tooling into our day-to-day and to think about how that enables us to have greater focus and greater prioritization, because I think there's lots of asks being made of lots of people, but I think this can unlock people to do some of their best work.
Love it. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Sienne. Really appreciate it. And very excited to see this post go live.
Great. Thank you.
The E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the E-commerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.